My wife Kelly and I have been together for several years now. We've built what I always believed to be a solid and loving relationship. There was trust, mutual respect, and a connection that I thought was unshakable. But sometimes, it's the smallest things that can unravel the sense of security you've worked so hard to cultivate. Sometimes, it's something you overhear, something unintended for your ears, that plants a seed of doubt you didn't even know was there. Last night, Kelly and her best friend Allison were having one of their usual girls' nights on the patio. A couple of glasses of wine, some laughter, and the familiar hum of their voices drifting through the house. It was a scene I had witnessed 100 times before. Normally, I give them their space. I'll head upstairs, watch TV, or tinker around on the computer to give them privacy. It's a little unspoken rule we've developed over the years. They have their time, and I do my own thing. It's never been an issue. But last night was different. I was upstairs, as usual, flipping through channels, waiting for something decent to come on. Then, the cable cut out. Just like that, the screen went black, and I was left in silence. I sat there, waiting for it to come back on, mildly irritated, when I realized that I could hear Kelly and Allison's conversation more clearly than usual. The open window carried their words up to me, and before I knew it, I was listening. I shouldn't have. I know that now. But in that moment, curiosity got the better of me. Allison was talking about her new boyfriend, gushing over how she didn't even let him get in the door before she was all over him. She laughed as she described the excitement and passion, and my wife, Kelly, responded in a way that made my stomach drop. "Yeah, I was like that with my ex," Kelly said, chuckling softly. I felt a strange pang in my chest, but I couldn't stop listening. Allison laughed too, and I heard her say, "Yeah, I remember you gushing about it all the time." It hit me harder than I expected. I could feel the blood rush to my ears as the weight of her words settled in. Kelly had never been like that with me. I tried to brush it off, telling myself that maybe I was overreacting. After all, we've been together for years, and we've built a life together. We have a strong relationship and an amazing connection in bed. Kelly never says no when it comes to intimacy, and our sex life has always left her satisfied. At least, that's what I thought. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized something I had never really considered before. Kelly has never been the one to initiate, not once. From the very beginning of our relationship, it's always been me. I've always been the one to make the first move, to suggest intimacy, and she's always been receptive, even eager sometimes, but never the initiator. I hadn't thought much of it before. It didn't bother me at the time because I assumed that was just how our dynamic worked. I liked being the one to take the lead, but now, after hearing her talk about her ex, I couldn't help but wonder, why wasn't she like that with me? Why hadn't she ever been all over me the way she had been with him? I didn't know how to process it. It's not like I believed she loved her ex more than me. She left him after all, and from what I know, it wasn't a healthy relationship. He got them evicted 3 times because he couldn't hold down a job, and eventually, she had enough. That's when she ended things with him, and we met about a year later. But still, the thought gnawed at me. If she had been so passionate with him, even in the midst of a dysfunctional relationship, why had that same passion never been there with me? The man she married, the man she supposedly called the love of her life. I felt unsettled. Doubt started to creep in. I had always been confident in our relationship, but now, I was second-guessing things I had never questioned before. Had I been blind to something all this time? Was there some missing piece, some unspoken truth between us that I wasn't aware of? By the time the cable came back on, I had completely lost interest in TV. I was stuck in my own head, replaying Kelly's words over and over. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong, that maybe there was more to her past with her ex than I had realized. I knew I shouldn't have been listening, but now that I had, there was no going back. I didn't sleep well that night. Every time I closed my eyes, my mind drifted back to Kelly and her ex. The image of her being all over him, gushing about their passion, filled my head, and it made my stomach turn. I didn't want to confront her about it. I didn't want to admit that I had eavesdropped on her conversation with Allison, but the longer I sat with it, the worse I felt. The next morning, Kelly noticed something was off. She always does. "Is everything okay?" she asked over breakfast, her brow furrowed with concern. I shrugged it off. "Yeah, I'm fine. Just didn't sleep well." She didn't press me, but I could tell she wasn't convinced. I spent the rest of the day trying to push the thoughts aside, telling myself that I was overthinking it, that our relationship was fine. But by the time the evening rolled around, I knew I had to say something. I couldn't just sit with this feeling forever. It was eating me up inside, and I needed to know the truth. That night, after dinner, I finally worked up the courage to talk to her. We were sitting on the couch, relaxing after a long day, and I turned to her, my heart pounding in my chest. "Kelly," I started, my voice hesitant. "I need to talk to you about something." Kelly turned to look at me, her expression immediately shifting from relaxed to concerned. "What's going on?" she asked, sitting up straighter. She could sense the tension in my voice, and I knew I couldn't back out now. I took a deep breath, trying to gather my thoughts. "Last night, when you and Allison were out on the patio, I overheard part of your conversation." Her brow furrowed, and I could see the confusion in her eyes. "What do you mean? You were listening to us?" "It wasn't on purpose," I quickly clarified. "The cable went out, and I was waiting for it to come back on. The window was open, and your voices just drifted up. I didn't mean to eavesdrop." She crossed her arms, clearly on edge now. "Okay, so what did you hear?" I hesitated. This was the part I had been dreading. "You were talking about your ex," I said quietly. "About how you used to, be all over him when he came home. Like, you couldn't wait to be with him." Kelly's face softened, but I could still see the confusion lingering. "Okay? And I guess it just threw me off," I continued, my words stumbling out faster now. "You've never been like that with me. You've never been the one to initiate. It's always me. I didn't really think about it before, but after hearing that, I couldn't help but wonder, why?" Her mouth dropped open slightly, like she hadn't expected that to be what was bothering me. She stared at me for a moment, processing what I had said. "Wait," she said slowly. "Is that why you've been acting so moody today?" I nodded, feeling a bit foolish now that I had said it out loud. "Yeah, I don't know. It made me question things. Like, why were you like that with him but not with me?" For a moment, Kelly just sat there, blinking at me in disbelief. Then, much to my surprise, her expression shifted from confusion to frustration. "John," she said, her voice sharp. "First off, don't listen in on my conversations with Allison. If you have something you want to ask me, just ask me, but you don't get to overhear bits and pieces and draw your own conclusions. And Allison's secrets aren't yours to hear either." I flinched at her tone, realizing that I had clearly struck a nerve. She had every right to be angry about me listening in, but I hadn't expected her to be this upset. I opened my mouth to apologize, but she cut me off. "Second," she continued, "you have no idea what my life was like when I was with him. Yeah, I used to jump him when he walked through the door, but do you want to know why? Because if I didn't, he'd go straight to his PlayStation, and I'd have nothing. That relationship was a total mess. He was the first person I lived with after moving out of my parents' house, and I thought we were supposed to take on the world together. But he couldn't keep his shit together, and I was working my ass off to pay our bills while he got us evicted over and over again." Her words hit me like a freight train. This wasn't the response I had been expecting. She wasn't reminiscing about her ex with fondness. She was venting about a time in her life that had clearly been filled with stress and disappointment. "I was under so much pressure back then," she continued, her voice softer now. "My job was stressful, the bills kept piling up, and I felt completely alone in that relationship. Sex was the only thing I had to hold on to that made me feel remotely good. But it wasn't even that great. I was just desperate to feel something other than the weight of everything else. That's why I jumped him. It wasn't because he was some amazing lover, or because I couldn't keep my hands off him. It was because, if I didn't, I was scared I'd lose the only connection we had left. I felt a pang of guilt in my chest. I hadn't known any of that. Kelly had never really talked about the details of her relationship with her ex beyond the basic facts, that he couldn't hold a job, that they had split up because of financial issues. I hadn't realized just how bad it had been for her. I wasn't gushing about him because I was happy, she added, her voice almost bitter now. I was trying to convince myself that the relationship wasn't as much of a disaster as it really was. I was trying to make myself feel better about the mess I was stuck in. I opened my mouth to respond, but she wasn't done. "Do you know why I've never been like that with you?" she asked, her tone softening but still firm. "Because I've never felt stuck with you, John. From the day we met, you've always had your life together. You've been stable, responsible, and supportive. You've always taken charge, and I never had to worry about whether or not the bills were going to get paid, or whether you were going to disappear into some video game for hours while I dealt with everything on my own. You and we're a team. And I've never needed to throw myself at you just to feel like I had something good in my life. You've given me so much more than that." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. The knot of insecurity that had been tightening in my chest all day started to loosen. I had completely misunderstood the situation. I had assumed that her passion for her ex meant something it didn't, that it was a reflection of something I was missing. But in reality, it had been the opposite. Her relationship with her ex had been filled with stress, disappointment, and insecurity. With me, she didn't have to prove anything. She didn't have to cling to moments of physical connection to feel secure. "I never realized," I said quietly, feeling a wave of relief wash over me. I thought maybe there was something wrong with me, or with us." Kelly's face softened even more, and she reached out to take my hand. "John, there's nothing wrong with us. I've never felt more secure, more loved, or more satisfied in my life. I'm sorry if I made you doubt that. I just thought you liked being the one to initiate things. You've always made me feel like no one else ever has." I felt a lump in my throat, and for a moment, I couldn't speak. All the doubts, all the insecurities that had been gnawing at me over the past day seemed to dissolve in an instant. I squeezed her hand, feeling a sense of calm that I hadn't felt since I overheard that conversation. Kelly scooted closer to me on the couch, her hand still holding mine. There was a warmth in her eyes that I hadn't noticed before, and it reassured me in a way that words couldn't. She had every reason to be angry with me for listening in on her conversation, for doubting her. But instead, she was opening up to me, being honest in a way that made me realize how much I had underestimated the depth of our connection. "I'm sorry I didn't come to you sooner," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. I let it fester, and it got to me in a way I didn't expect. She nodded, still holding my gaze. "I understand why you felt that way. I get it. But next time, just talk to me, okay? I'd rather you come to me with your feelings than keep them bottled up. We're in this together. Always." Her words wrapped around me like a comforting blanket. It wasn't just about this conversation, or what I overheard. It was about everything. It was about our partnership, our marriage, the trust we had built over the years. I realized, in that moment, that I had let a single comment make me question something much bigger than just our sex life. I had let it make me question the foundation of our relationship, and I felt foolish for doing so. Kelly smiled softly, her thumb gently brushing the back of my hand. "John, I've never felt more content in a relationship than I do with you. That's the truth. You've given me a life that I always wanted but never thought I'd have. I don't need to be constantly jumping you to prove that I love you. Our connection is deeper than that. I know, I said, feeling the weight of my earlier doubts lifting. I'm sorry I doubted that. She leaned in and kissed me, slow and tender, the kind of kiss that wasn't just about passion, but about reassurance, about intimacy in its truest form. When she pulled back, she gave me a playful smile. But if it bothers you that much, I'll work on initiating more. I promise. I laughed softly, feeling a sense of relief and gratitude wash over me. I don't need you to change anything, Kelly. I just needed to understand. She grinned and leaned her head against my shoulder. Well, I'm glad we cleared that up. But just so you know, you've never left me wanting for anything. Her words filled me with a sense of pride and contentment. We sat there in comfortable silence for a few moments, her head resting on my shoulder, and I let out a breath I didn't realize I had been holding. I think I let my insecurities get the best of me, I admitted. Hearing you talk about your ex like that, it just made me question why you hadn't been that way with me. I thought maybe there was something I was missing. Kelly lifted her head from my shoulder and looked at me seriously. John, you're not missing anything. That time in my life was complicated and I was in a really bad place emotionally. Sex wasn't about love or connection back then. It was about escaping the mess I was living in. It was about trying to hold on to something that made me feel good, even if it was temporary. With you, it's different. Our relationship has never been about that kind of desperation. I nodded, understanding her more deeply than I ever had before. I get it now. I really do. Kelly smiled again, this time with a softness that melted away any remaining doubts in my mind. You're the love of my life, John. I don't want you to ever question that. Ever. I won't, I promised. Not after this. She leaned in and kissed me again, and this time, the kiss lingered. There was no rush, no urgency, just the warmth of two people who understood each other in a way that only comes with time, trust, and love. When we finally pulled away, she gave me a playful nudge. Come on, let's go watch something and relax. No more overthinking. I smiled, feeling lighter than I had in days. That sounds perfect. As we settled in on the couch to watch a movie, I couldn't help but feel grateful. Grateful for Kelly, for our relationship, for the open and honest communication that had brought us even closer together. I realized that, while it was natural to have insecurities sometimes, the key to overcoming them was trust. Trust in each other and in the strength of what we had built together. In the days that followed, things felt different between us. Not in a dramatic way, but in a subtle, unspoken way that made our bond feel even stronger. Kelly did start initiating more, not because I asked her to, but because she wanted to show me how much she cared. And while I appreciated it, what mattered more was the understanding we had reached, that our relationship wasn't defined by who initiated or how often we were intimate. It was defined by the love, trust, and partnership we shared. Looking back, I realized how easy it was to let a small comment spiral into something bigger. But I also realized how lucky I was to have a wife like Kelly, someone who wasn't afraid to be honest, to communicate, and to reassure me when I needed it most. We had faced a small bump in the road, but we had navigated it together, and that made all the difference. Sometimes, it takes a moment of doubt to remind you of the strength of your relationship. And for me, that moment of doubt had turned into an opportunity to reaffirm what I already knew deep down. Kelly was my person, my partner, my love, and nothing, not even a conversation about an ex, could change that. As we sat on the couch, her head resting on my shoulder and her hand intertwined with mine, I felt at peace. I knew we were going to be okay. More than okay, in fact. We were going to keep killing it, just like she had said. Together.